We have our first speaker here, and I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Mohammed Yusuf Wali, who is going to talk about mental health in Somaliland. Dr. Mohammed is a graduate of the University of Hargeisa and also of Kampala International University in Uganda. He has worked as a medical doctor in the Hargeisa Group Hospital and as a pediatric lecturer and medical officer in the Kampala. In the last 4 years, Dr. Mohammed has been working with different international mental health charities based in the UK, including Richmond Psychosocial Foundation International, Richmond Fellowship International, and Richmond Companions International as Quality and Compliance Auditor and Director of Programs. He's a member of Health Watch Ealing, as well as a member of the Somaliland Mental Health Support Organization, being responsible for the organization's activities in London. So, Dr. Mohammed, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. And thank you very much. And I'm pleased to be here tonight. First, I would like to thank the organizers of the meeting, which I think will be very beneficial to all parties. And I will briefly talk about the mental health situation in Somaliland. It will not be an in-depth or very detailed presentation, but it will give you an idea of how the mental health services in Somaliland are today. We will touch base some of the challenges that the mental health clients face as the day goes by. We will also talk about what has been done so far, as well as the opportunities and the role of the Somaliland Mental Health Support Organization. So this is the map of Somaliland, showing all the different regions and different districts and the boundaries of the country. Next slide. So this is one of the activities done by the organization, the Somaliland Mental Health Support Organization. So just to give you an idea of the organization first, it was established in 2001 by the Somaliland community who live in Cardiff and Wales, mainly, but also with the idea from other people who live back home in the country and also with other diaspora communities. The idea was to help the people who have been affected by mental health in Somaliland. So that was the main idea of the organization. This is a picture which shows the World Mental Health Week, which I think was celebrated last week. The 10th of October, every year we commemorate the Mental Health Week. So this activity has taken place in Hargeisa, the capital city of Somaliland. That was last week. And the Somali health in general has got a lot of challenges. And when somebody tries to evaluate or assess the health situation, and specifically the mental health, we will look into different dimensions. First, we will look the human resource aspect. Then we will look at the self-delivery point. We'll also look at the socio-economic challenge that's faced the people that has got mental health, as well as the providers of the services. In general, in Somaliland, for example, the government of Somaliland spends about 4% of the national budget on health in general. So it's 4%. 4% of the whole total budget is spent on health generally. And you can see the whole health program for the country, including maternal health, child health, mental health, vaccination, everything, basically. And that itself is a challenge. And in the last years, that has also been going sometimes up and down. And 60% of that money, which I said it was 4%. So 4%, 60% of that money is spent on the operational costs and the running costs of the offices. So for example, maybe for salary, for maybe rent, for fuel, for something like that. So you can imagine from there the money that we use on the service delivery, like the services that we provide to the people, to the citizens. In general, another important point which I would like to highlight here is that in Somaliland, 60% of the health services is provided by the private sector. So only 40% is left for the government institutions. And that itself is unbalanced. About the mental health, as of today, there is no any statistics or any academic research which has been carried out to point the prevalence of mental health situation in Somaliland. When I say the prevalence, is the number of people who have been affected by mental health, the number of people who are ill because they have got problems with their thinking, behavior, or attitude. So that there's no official statistics. However, there are very small scale studies and surveys that has been carried out to find out what the most likely prevalence might be in Somaliland. And it is thought to be one of the highest in the world. Today, 1 in every 4 person will at some point suffer from mental health in the world. That is the world statistics. So 1 in every 4 persons will suffer from mental health at some point. But in Somaliland, that's far higher. That's far higher. The number is much greater than that. One of the studies carried out, for example, showed that 1 in every 3 people in Somaliland will at some point suffer from mental health. And if you compare that data with the world statistics, you can see the difference. There are a lot of factors that has contributed to the high prevalence of mental health in Somaliland. For example, there has been violence, there has been displacement, there has been war, civil war that has been going on for some time. Poverty and unemployment is very high. There is a substance called cat. I think most of you might have heard it, if not seen, cat, which is very common practice in the Somali community in general. And that is believed to have contributed a lot to mental health. For example, I was working in Hargeisa Group Hospital, and we have done some study on the people who had been admitted to the hospital because they have got some form of mental health. And the findings were very interesting. We found out that 90% of people who have been admitted to the hospital because of they have got mental health have been have been chewing cud. So that shows the link between cud chewing and the mental health. Academically, we cannot say cud causes mental health. We're not saying that, but there is relationship. There is that causal relationship between cud and mental health. Another point which is very interesting, which I would like to highlight, is the Somali culture, which also, I believe, contribute to the problem. For example, in the Somali culture, we only have either the person has got mental health or you don't. Whereas in the general life, we have got the spectrum. Everybody has got the spectrum, what we call health spectrum. For example, today you might be low, tomorrow you might be fine, the other day you might be a little bit high. So you have got that spectrum, like day-to-day basis. So everybody will have that kind of life. But in the Somali culture, unfortunately, we don't have that spectrum. So what we have is either you are mad or you are not. So there's no in between. We don't have anything in between. Either you are mad or you are not. Where in other societies, You might have stress, you might have depression, you might have a bit of anxiety on one day, and then the next morning you might be fine. So we don't have that spectrum as well. In the Somali community, another important point which I would like to highlight or mention is the role of the traditional and the religious centers. And I have started with my presentation that 60% of the services are provided by the private sector in Somaliland. So these 60% are not always qualified medical personnel. There are a lot of traditional or religious or untrained people who provide the services to the people, especially the mental health. So at some point somebody has got some signs of mental health. The first point they might go would be the religious or maybe the traditional or maybe the healing centers. It might not be the medical advice, or it might not be the medically qualified personnel. That's a challenge in a way, but it's also an option to those who do not access the medical professionals. So we have got that dilemma as well. And in terms of human resource, generally, when somebody has got mental health, there is a way that we treat. And the way that we treat is it must be a group of people working together to provide the service that the client needs. So for example, you might need a doctor, you might need a psychiatrist, you would need a psychotherapist, you would need a occupational therapist, you would need community nurse, all these people who will come together to provide the care that you need. Because when somebody has got mental health, it is not only medicines that they need. They don't need just tablets. They need a lot more than that. And that includes counseling, that include occupational therapy, that include advice, that include behavioral treatment. But unfortunately, in Somaliland, we don't have these. We don't have a lot of doctors. We only have 2 psychiatrists in Somaliland for the whole of Somaliland. And these are newly graduated doctors. Fortunately, both of them were my classmates. So we have only 2 psychiatrists, doctors in Somaliland for a population of nearly about 3.5. There is no any occupational therapist. There is 1 psychologist for the whole of Somaliland. There is no psychotherapist. There is no community psychiatrist nurse. So you can imagine 3.5 million people who at least 1 in every 3 persons have got mental health with this kind of service, with this kind of human resource. So that's the real challenge. That, as a Somaliland mental health support organization, that is what we want to do something about. A lot of people might access the primary health care. So, for example, the service the provision system is called the referral system. So, for example, we have got the health point. We've got the MCH, maternal and child health. We've got the district hospital. We've got the regional hospital, and we have got the national referral hospital. So that is how cases are referred between the health provision system. A lot of health provision might go through that way, but mental health is very vertical. It has not been integrated into that system. So for example, if somebody has got mental health at the district level or at the community level, they might not access any health service at all. So that's also another issue. And medicines, or the provision of essential medicines, is also an important aspect here. If somebody has got mental health, it is different if you got chest infection. It is different if you got might be respiratory infection or any other infection. Because if you got infection, you go to a doctor, they'll give you some tablets plus some advice, and then hopefully within 1 or 2, you might be better. That's what we hope. That's what doctors do most of the time. In mental health, it is different. If you have got mental health, you need to take medicines for a very long time, most of the time. It is not only one tablet, you might need a lot of tablets. You might be one or two or three, but also a lot of the medicines that are used to support people with mental health have got side effects. So also you might need another one or two tablets to treat the side effects of the medicines. So there is real challenge here. So if somebody has got mental health in Somaliland, they would need at least maybe 5 tablets. And you can imagine maybe they don't work. They have got, other issues. Maybe they have to provide the assistance to the family as well. So that's also a challenge. So a lot of the people, because of the financial limitations or because of the financial challenge they face, they might not access mental health services at all. But WHO and another few international organizations has been providing the essential mental health supplies in the last few years. There are a lot of, in Somaliland, there has been only very few mental health services, very few mental health hospitals. So one in Hargeisa, another one in Berbera, another one in Puro, there is one in Porama, and there is one in Gabile. But the rest of the country does not have mental health hospitals. So if somebody has got mental health elsewhere outside of these regions, they will not either get mental health support or they have to travel to a region where they can access. And because they cannot access the medical profession they need, they have to go to traditional healers. They have to go to the religious people. And I know religious people and traditional people can do a lot at some point, but they might not be able to treat completely the mental health. And I would also like to mention that we have found out also that a lot of people, a lot of the Somali community who live here in the Western world, if they get mental health or if they have got some signs of mental health, the family advised to go back to Somalia or Somaliland. And a lot of the times they will end up going to the traditional healers or the religious people because we know for a fact that they will not find the mental health support they need in Somaliland. And because the mental health services are provided by untrained professional people, then here are a lot of abuses. A lot of abuses take place in the health service profession. When clients with mental health go to religious or traditional centers, they are chained. So maybe 90% of people who go to traditional and religious people, they are chained because they show aggressive behavior, because of the challenge, because of their complex needs. They show off. They show challenging behavior. And instead of providing the psychotherapy or the psychology or the medical treatment or medical support they need, they have to be chained. And they might be chained for a very long time. And that is abuse. That might mental torture. That might increase the problems they already had. WHO, which is the World Health Organization, said in Africa and in most of the developing countries, because people cannot find the mental health services they need, they will end up being chained, either at home or in the streets, or maybe in community centers or traditional centers. So chain, overcrowding, poor hygiene, because there are no regulatory agencies. There is no any regulatory agency. There is no commission that oversees and inspects the standard of the medical professional, the standard of the mental health service that these people get. So there will be overcrowding, there will be unhygienic situations, they will be restricted on freedom of movement, there are no adequately trained staff, they will not be supported to change any behavior. So as I said, this organization, the Somaliland Mental Health Support Organization, is based in Cardiff, but we have got different programs in Somaliland. Mainly we do three main things. One, we advocate for the people who have got mental health. We do awareness raising programs for the people. We organize symposium and community sessions. We approach religious people, the business people, the influential people like the politicians, and we say something about mental health. We advocate. That's the first point we do. The second thing that we do is capacity building. We have very limited resource, and we cannot do much of the things that we want to do. But we try to do as much as we can. So we provide some trainings to the service providers first, not the community directly, but a lot of the time is we speak with the service providers. And a lot of the times there are people who might be medical trained or might not have medical training at all. And one of the first things that we did was to produce a film about the mental health situation in Somaliland. I think I'll give you a website where you can access the film, but it shows like the challenges and the problems and the day-to-day issues that a lot of the people with mental health in Somaliland face. We have created a network of volunteers throughout the world. A lot of them are based in Somaliland. We have been able to open 2 field offices in Somaliland, one in Hargeisa and another one in Puro, the second capital city. We have organized a lot of volunteers who now donate, who go to different business people to get involved with the mental health. We have also in the last few years been providing the essential medicines to the different hospitals in Somaliland. And I think that has been one of the greatest achievements so far for the charity. We sometimes run some community raising or fundraising programs for the media. And another important achievement, which I would say we have done, was we have been able to establish a secure unit in Hargeisa Group Hospital, a 14-bedded secure unit for Hargeisa Group Hospital, and that costed about $90,000 or $100,000. So that was a lot, but mainly the people in Somaliland and the diaspora community has contributed those £1, £2, £10, which has been collected from the different people in Somaliland. So I would say thank you for everybody who at somehow, in a way, contributed to that as well. And we have now started to put charity boxes in Somaliland, and I think that's very new to the Somali community in general, back home. In the Western world, in the UK or elsewhere in the Europe, you will find a lot of the charities. That is the main stream of funding support. But in Somaliland, we don't have that idea, we don't have that culture. So we have started to put charity boxes in the different business, shopping centers, so that people can donate. And so far it has been very, very successful. And I think that's most of the presentation. Just to finalize, the challenges that we face is mainly policy and legislation. If you want to do something, or in general, if you want to carry out any program, you need the legal framework that will help you, will support you, and will protect you. So in Somaliland, that is what we are lacking. We don't have that legal support. We don't have the Mental Health Act. We don't have a mental health strategy. We don't have a lot of the legislation that mental health needs. There has been a draft, a mental health draft, however, that has not yet been implemented. So that's also another challenge. There are inadequate services. There are social and cultural influences. And I think these are the main challenges that we face. And if you are interested, you can get involved with our activities. You can donate. You can become a member of the charity. You can volunteer with us. You can help us do fundraising one way or another. You can join us to do campaigning or advocacy or capacity building. If you are a mental health expert, you can provide training or you can help your time. So that's what I'm trying to share with you this evening. I've prepared a presentation, but unfortunately, because of the way it had, I've not been able to use that presentation. So thank you very much again for the time you have given to me, and I hope that at least it gave you an idea of how the situation of mental health in Somaliland. So thank you very much. I would like to thank Dr.
We need to move on into a completely different direction now. I understand our next speaker, Dr. Idil Osman, is here. Yeah, oh, yeah, please come. It is a great pleasure to introduce Idil Osman, who is going to talk on contextualizing Somali migration increase. Idil has worked for over 12 years as a national and international journalist for the BBC, The Guardian, and The Voice of America. She spent the majority of her career covering stories from the diaspora and the Somali conflict by Palgrave Macmillan. There is a website that people can have at the end if you're interested. We could give that to you. So along with numerous publications she had that focus on media, migration, development, conflicts in the Horn of Africa, and diaspora communities in Europe. She completed her PhD in journalism and is an expert on diasporic media and development communications. She's currently a research associate at SOAS and is working on a research project called the Research and Evidence Facility that's examining the root causes of regular and irregular migration from the Horn of Africa. So another extremely talented speaker who, to remind you, will talk about contextualizing Somali migration increase, and she has some very interesting things to tell us about. Idil.
Thank you very much. I wanted to begin my talk with a remembrance for the victims of the Mogadishu truck bomb attack. We just had a vigil at SOAS, organized by the Somali Student Society. And it's important that we keep atrocities like that in the forefront of our minds, in the forefront of the public's mind, and we keep putting pressure on our elected officials to recognize publicly and show solidarity and support with the victims. It is the worst atrocity and carnage that has happened in Somalia to date, and it's one of the biggest global terrorist attacks that has happened. And we have yet to see representation from the media. And that saddens me. As a media and communications scholar, I am deeply troubled by the lack of recognition. We talk about, all lives matter, and we have to come together and band together. But when it comes to the suffering of people who happen to be of this kind of color or darker, those lives don't matter that much. And so we don't see the London Eye lighting up. We don't see Sadiq Khan, our mayor, our elected officials coming out and speaking up about this and showing their solidarity and support. So it's important that we collectively put pressure on our elected officials, and we keep the victims in our prayers. Even yesterday there was an attack that happened that killed 11 people. So keep them at the forefront of your mind. Do as much as you can in your own individual capacities, and pray for them for as long as you can. Now, these kind of atrocities are the ones that really push the migration coming out of the Somali territories. It's the reason why migration has been a steady process since the late 1980s and onwards. into the civil war and the conflict that ensued afterwards. And so what I want to do is to give you some snapshots of contemporary dynamics of migration based on a study that we've just completed at SOAS on the research project that Eleni has just mentioned. So I want to share some of the contemporary dynamics that are coming out. And then I want to talk about the diaspora component, because I think that's the link that we have that makes it relevant to us. And then finish off with some recommendations of how each one of us can participate. I'm very aware that the time is against us, so I'm going to try and keep it really brief. Now, displacement has been, it's been a fluctuating process, but since 2011 famine, that has really pushed displacement to the forefront of it becoming the biggest humanitarian issue that Somalia faces, in addition to the security and the terrorist issues that the country is facing. So the mass displacement that leads to displacement, usually when it comes to where these displaced people end up, it tends to take two trajectories, and they come from the south and the central of Somalia, often because of the terrorist attacks that are happening, the famine that then comes on top of it, and droughts and lack of resources. All of these things become compounding issues that then force people, most of them from the south and central regions, to go in towards Mogadishu, and those that can travel and that can afford to go further afield tend to go to Ethiopia or Kenya. And I think most of you are aware about the Dadaab refugee camp. It's been there since 1991. It was initially built for the capacity of 90,000. At its height in 2013, it was looking after 500,000 people. It's still under-resourced. The people are still living in temporary settings, even though we're now talking second and third generation refugees that are living there, with no access to educational institutions, permanent education institutions, no access to permanent health care. The mental health that we were just talking about, that our brother just eloquently spoke about, is massive in Dadaab. And these are the kind of things that really don't get a lot of attention. People focus very much, and by people I mean policymakers, international donors, and the communities that tend to work within these conditions. They focus very much on response. They focus on return, but they don't focus on accommodating for the needs of the people so that they are able to go back. And then also the needs of the host communities. The demographics change, especially when you look at the people that initially went to Dadaab, that went from Mogadishu, or from the south, or, from Kismayo and Baydhabo and those places. Where are they going back to? How is the host community capable of bringing them in and having them come back? What are the resources that are available? These are the issues that aren't even looked at. They don't even begin to look at them, in addition to the insecurity, the instability that exists there. So it's important that we put pressure on these international communities, that they don't simplify complex situations. The displacement issues that are going on in Somalia are extremely complex, and it's important that we take them bit by bit so that we can arrive at a holistic approach. It might take longer, but it will be much better in the future than having temporary responses. The other issue that seems to be quite pressing is the property rights that people are going back to. There's a lot of issues in terms of verifying who are the actual property owners of the places of return, whether it's Mogadishu. I love it when that happens.
I should ask people to tell me.
I like embarrassing the people when that happens. You need to switch off your phone.
No, it's my bad chairing, I should have said at the beginning. Everybody's at it now.
Everyone's at it now, yes. Have they all been turned silent now? Or can we expect more surprises?
They won't dare after this, don't worry.
Good. Are you serious? You're actually on the phone. I'm going to have to talk to you later. Okay. And then in the south, there's, in terms of insecurity, and in addition to the insecurity that is caused by terrorism, there's also the insecurity of self-appointed camp managers at the IDP camps, the local security forces who are essentially just rehabilitated militiamen, you know, who've just been incorporated into the Somali National Army. But they tend to be one of the biggest issues, especially when it comes to the security of the IDP camps, the displaced people that are in the IDP camps. There is a large-scale exploitation, sexual assault, rape that goes on with impunity. There was a report that came out in 2014, and I actually think this situation has worsened now, of Human Rights Watch, that talked about the double victimization that women particularly face that are in those camps. They suffer the initial attack, the rape or the sexual assault that they face in the first instance, and then there's the victimization and the marginalization that follows as a result of the community finding out that they've been raped. And so, in addition to the stigmatization that they face, they can't even go and seek the support that they would need to come over, to get over the abuse that they've suffered. So what we're talking here is a compounding of instability, security, human rights abuses on top of each other. And so all of these things then lead to people literally becoming mentally ill. I mean, when we're saying 1 in 3, 1 in 4, I'm actually surprised that the statistics are not worse than that.
They are actually.
I'm sure. I mean, you know, if you had to go through that kind of abuse for, you know, 10, 15 years, and you've suffered that multiple times. You know, you've suffered that initially during the Civil War, and then you ran to Mogadishu and you suffered it over there, and then you ran to Kenya and you suffered it over there, and then you came back to Mogadishu, and you see, how do you cope with that and still remain a human being? For me, that is something that is extremely difficult to even begin to comprehend. And we really need to start talking about mental health in a much broader sense of it being linked directly to the issues that they are separating it from, to security, to instability, to lack of resources, to poverty, because mental health, you know, is linked to all of those things, and it's important that we bring those things together so that people don't see it as a separate entity. I mean, you guys really touched upon that so eloquently, that, you know, they're seeing it as even separate from physical health, you know. So these are the kind of things that we, as I think the biggest power that we have as those in the diaspora is to galvanize ourselves and to use our collective voices to put pressure on our elected officials, to put pressure on those that have been elected into positions in Somalia, in Somaliland, to really start focusing on the intertwinement of these issues and not look at them in separate contexts. In terms of displacement, there's a big distinction, I think, in terms of how it unfolds in Somalia versus how it unfolds in Somaliland. In the context of Somaliland, what we're seeing is the expansion of the city. So places like Hargeisa, Bur'a, Borame, Berbera, they are growing. And so there's a large-scale rural to urban migration that's happening. And that results in the creation of peripheral communities who lack access to social services, who subsist on marginal informal sector employment activities, and they usually tend to be people that have come from the rural, from the countryside, that have lost their livestock, they've lost the animals and the resources that they've had, yet they are unable to survive in the urban context. So that's the kind of displacements that we're talking in the Somaliland context. And then there's issues of people that have come from the south and central Somalia, the sort of relative peace that exists in Somaliland being appealing to them, and so they come to find refuge over there. But then there's the issue of the international community and Somalia seeing them as IDPs, whereas Somaliland would see them as refugees, and so that complicates the resources that they would have access to, so that keeps them displaced in a sense, and it prolongs the condition that they are surviving in. So when we come to the diaspora component, what I wanted to talk to you guys about is how, you know, migration is the one thing that is essentially a constant thing in our collective culture. And there's a very acute link between the outwards migration and the perception of the diaspora, the mediated perception of the diaspora. A lot of young people that we've spoken to in our research would tell you that, you know, it might be difficult initially to leave from, you know, from Hargeisa, from Bosaso, wherever they leave from, onwards to Yemen. And if they end up making it to Europe, they feel that they can then have a life of luxury, like the lives of luxuries that they see on the media. This is often the reference that keeps coming back. And then there's also the upgrade in status that they've noticed from the diasporas who've come back. And that have been able to occupy elite positions. You know, the presidents, the prime ministers, the parliament speakers, you know, in all of the Somali territories we've seen are predominantly from the diaspora. So that speaks volumes to these young people, and it encourages them to take those risks, despite the fact that they will be risking their lives. And a lot of them don't even make it. So I think that brings me to several points. One is that there is a lack of clear information of what lies ahead. That's one thing. We have a number of NGOs that are working on this, you know, on the communication side of things, and they do campaigns, songs, and bringing artists together, which is great, but it doesn't have a trickle-down effect. It's very much on the top level. It circulates amongst policymakers and NGOs and other activists, but it doesn't trickle down to the people that are actually making these journeys, because they don't have TV stations. They barely have internet access. I mean, in Somalia, the internet penetration is 2 to 3%. So if you focus your information campaign on the internet and on TV, it's not really going to trickle down to the people that really need it. So I think, what we need is a very consistent and focused information campaign across the Somali territories that uses the local means of communication. So we're talking Masajid Yada, we're talking Friday khutbas, we're talking the coffee and tea shops, the local community radio stations. These are, you know, the ones that the people that would be migrants or that are already in the process of migration. These are the kind of means that they would access. In addition to, you know, the ones that are tech savvy would probably be accessing WhatsApp groups, Viber groups that they would be part of, and other migrants that are already making the journey would probably be sharing information in that sense. But it's very important that we get involved in that debate. And it's not a case of getting them to be scared or to be afraid from migration, because migration, if anything, it's synonymous with the Somali culture, it's synonymous with Somali history, and it's synonymous with human history. We've been migrating since day one. Existence. You know? So it's not something that's going to stop, but what we need to think about is how can we make it safe and legal for the migrants until the conditions that they are running away from are eliminated. You know, what Sashida said in her poem so eloquently, when she said, you know, you don't leave home unless home is the mouth of a shark. So the people are migrating for a reason, and there's no point trying to keep them contained within the areas that they are fleeing. But we need to start thinking about how we can create safe passages that will allow them to make that journey from an informed perspective, allow the officials that are along the borders, because that's another problem. The smugglers tend to have a very sophisticated network that spans across the region, past the Horn of Africa, across North Africa, and then the Mediterranean shores and the Gulf countries. They're very well connected. And their connection and sophistication is further enhanced by the border officials that they are connected to. So it's very important that we put pressure, again, on the government officials. You know, the Sudanese border officials that we spoke to, who are on the border of Ethiopia and Sudan, you know, when you ask them, why is it that you tend to facilitate this? I mean, you can see that they don't have any oversight. They get very little salary. And so for them, this is pretty much, you know, a means to survive. They're not thinking about the bigger issues. They're not thinking about the bigger calamities and the consequences that follow these immediate actions. So it's important that we have this kind of holistic approach in terms of our advocacy, that we focus on the top level of policy makers and politicians, but we also focus on engaging, because that's the best asset that we have. We are directly connected to the migrants on the ground. We're directly connected to dadka Soomaaliyeed, yani dhulka jooga. We're connected to them. So it's important that we share through our word of mouth, through the local media, the local radio stations that we have access to, and inform them of what lies ahead, so that if they choose to migrate, they know exactly what they're going to come across. But we also need to inform them of what the opportunities might be if they stay. There's a wonderful report that was written by Eid Ali, who's also from Research Associate at SOAS, called focusing on tahrib from Somaliland. And she was talking about this concept of hoya tahribin, which is, from, if I understand it correctly, a way for mothers to invest in their sons by buying them something that they can use in the local capacity. So invest in a car so that they can maybe start a taxi service, maybe invest in, bring some money together, like and then set up a little business. So these are the kind of opportunities that exist and that they also need to be made aware of. And so they have choice. They're not forced to migrate, right? That's a form of empowerment that we need to focus on. And finally, I think it's important that we as a diaspora take responsibility for the material that we put out there. If we keep making life in the UK look like it is all glamorous and we're all living in big fat mansions and we keep taking pictures in rented cars pretending that it's ours, that's going to mislead people. I was saying early on to the young students in SOAS that to whom much is given, much is expected. We are privileged. And we do have far better lives than our counterparts and brothers and sisters in Somalia. And so that means we have extra responsibility to make sure that we lead by example and we show the lives that we live here as it is, but we also encourage them to not take not to put their lives in terrible risks, and work with them on how they can make their lives better with our input. If they choose to migrate, then that's their choice. But if they choose to stay, we need to support them in either way, by our word and by our deed as well. Thank you very much.